Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for January 8th, 2026. What I'm going to be reporting today is that the phase shift that was forecast by Helga Zepp-LaRouche is coming at us at a high rate of speed. No, it's not the phase shift that many were hoping for with the re-election of President Donald Trump, which he had promised to reverse the Clinton, Bush, Obama, Biden paradigm in which the U.S. is waging permanent wars as a leader of a unipolar order. The idea that he would put an end to the neocons' wet dream of the U.S. as the sole superpower, running a global empire in a world run by a banker dictatorship. No, instead we're seeing an escalation of that very same Biden-Obama paradigm to a Hobbesian world of each against all, a battle for survival of the fittest. Is this what America first means? Now, events of the last days were summed up very adequately as a reversal of the Anchorage agreements. That is the summit meeting between Putin and Trump in Anchorage, where they discussed moving into a full-scale normalization of U.S.-Russian relations. The upcoming events, which will be held by the Executive Intelligence Review, will take this up in detail. But it was summarized yesterday in a short video by my colleague Dennis Small under the headline, "It's Worse Than You Think." So to counter this, we're going to have a series of events, starting tomorrow with the International Peace Coalition meeting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Then on the 10th, the kickoff of Diane Sara's presidential campaign. And then on the 12th of January, the EIR Emergency Roundtable on the implications of the attack on Venezuela. The title of that is more fully described by the following statement. It's worse than you think, the strategic implications of the attack on Venezuela, and how to bring the world back from the brink. Now, when we talk about a Hobbesian world, what are we talking about? Well, Thomas Hobbes was a 17th century British philosophical radical. In fact, one of the founders of that tradition. And he formulated what became the British imperial strategy, the global empire, which was soon enforced by the British East India Company. He wrote a book in 1651 called Leviathan, which defines this idea of each human being at war with every other human being, the law of the jungle. And this became the unofficial creed of the British Empire. The central idea is that might makes right, that if you have the power to enforce from the top, then that's the way it should be done to prevent individuals from determining the outcome in a war of each against all. Now, we saw this in events yesterday, where American forces, backed by the British, seized 2 Russian tankers that were empty. They were Russia flag tankers, and they were accused of violating the sanctions against providing Russian oil to other countries. In this case, it was supposedly oil from Iran and Venezuela that were seized. Now, this is an act of piracy. It's a violation of international law. What gives the United States the right to do this? Well, the British media was saying that this was in line with the policy coming from the City of London. And there was a great deal of excitement in the United Kingdom over this because it now means that they've got Trump back under control. At least that's what they think. The Telegraph, in its coverage, said the following about the ship seizures. The moves suggest an emboldened Mr. Trump is ready to confront Russian interests after repeatedly offering concessions to Putin in pursuit of peace in Ukraine. So the way the British see this is that this was an essential element of forcing Trump to break with Putin, just as we said, to put an end to normalization of relations and to put the United States on a course toward peace with Russia based on mutual development of joint economic progress. Now, it's not just targeting Venezuela, but also President Trump talking about taking Greenland. And this would, of course, put the United States in an immediate confrontation with NATO. Also, it's likely that Iran figures into this because the Trump administration has been talking to Israel about possibly taking out the Iranian regime. Now, wasn't the idea of regime change rejected by the Trump administration? That Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, announced very prominently that the United States would no longer support regime change. Well, they sophistically said the act in Venezuela was not regime change because they left the vice president in charge. But what was said at the press conference by Trump repeatedly is, we will run Venezuela. Venezuela's oil is ours. And that's the idea of regime change. Now, this is made worse by the announcement yesterday that the U.S. defense budget is going to be increased by more than $500 billion a year beginning in 2027. That is, that at present, in 2026, the defense budget is $901 billion, just short of $1 trillion. If you add in the other areas, CIA and others, it's probably over $1 trillion. But now they're saying that for 2027, it will be $1.5 trillion for defense. The idea of America first, that you spend that money at home for infrastructure, for education, for healthcare, for energy development, forget it. It's going to go into war and policing the world. Now, this, of course, is subject to congressional approval. And that's part of the reason that the EIR is going to sponsor these events, to build in the population a fight against this turning, again, the United States into the world policeman. But this Hobbesian view is reflected across the board. You have members of Congress in both parties praising what was done in Venezuela, or at least the Democrats are not raising a strong objection to it. You have France and the United Kingdom promising to send ground troops to Ukraine to enforce the truce if it ever arrives. Now, this Hobbesian worldview was described by Deputy Chief of Staff for the White House Policy, Stephen Miller, who started his statement saying the U.S. will run Venezuela. Then he went on to say that the world is governed by iron laws. It is governed by strength, governed by force, governed by power. In other words, might makes right. Forget the principles of the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. If we have the military muscle, we will use it to enforce a Pax Americana. And that is why the United States is being isolated by much of the rest of the world, even as the U.S. is using its military, that is, the Trump administration is using the U.S. military to impose the conditions of a unipolar order on a world which is trying to move on to become a collectivity of sovereign states working for mutual benefit. Now, this idea of the Hobbesian philosophy of the world as every man against every other man was stated by Hobbes, that nothing, or actually stated by, not Hobbes, by Stephen Miller, who's coming across as the modern day Hobbesian. He said, if given that this is the state of the world, the law of the jungle, every man against every other man, he went on to say that nothing can be unjust. No notions exist of right and wrong. and justice and injustice have no place. In other words, it is an anarchistic battle in which the destruction of nations is acceptable. Now, this is really this is the phase shift that Helga Zepp-LaRouche was talking about. Now, given that tomorrow is Friday, I welcome your questions and comments on this. If you disagree with what I'm saying, bring it out. Let's discuss it, because this is our future. So you can send me your questions or comments to harleysch@gmail.com, and we'll take them up tomorrow. But put down this schedule again. The Friday at 11 a.m., the International Peace Coalition. Saturday, and we'll have the details of this on our website, there'll be the Diane Sayre Presidential Kickoff event. And then on Monday, the Emergency Roundtable of the Executive Intelligence Review on how to escape this phase shift, which puts us in a state of war against every other country on the planet. So act now. Send me your comments. Get involved. Subscribe to the EIR Daily Alert. And let's make sure that this phase shift is stopped in its tracks.